I want to welcome you to tonight's community conversation, a panel discussion on preserving our mental health in the midst of this pandemic. We actually had a community conversation on mental health scheduled before the pandemic ever broke out. We had to cancel it, but we wanted to bring you this tonight by Zoom because we know this topic is so important. So many of us are struggling with anxiety or depression or loneliness in the midst of this crisis. And for those who aren't struggling right now, you probably know someone who is. And so we want to equip you with practical tools to help you to weather this storm well and to help you to help others who are struggling. So to that end, we've invited three wonderful Christian counselors and psychologists to join us tonight. All three have helped countless people in our community and in our church and have helped my wife Julie and I too. So first we've got Eric Salwin with College Station Christian Counseling, who's also a professor in the counseling department at Dallas Theological Seminary. Eric helped me in my own battle with clinical depression. We've also got two women who've been instrumental in assisting my wife in her struggle with anxiety. Marlene C., a licensed psychologist who's been practicing in the Bryan College Station area for more than 30 years, and Christine Hoover, a Christian counselor in Huntsville, who was actually our speaker at last year's Southwood Women's Retreat. We're so excited for you to learn from all three of these godly, wise professionals. We're praying that this video will be a powerful tool to help you and equip you to help others. Finally, please don't hesitate to reach out to our church or to any three of these counselors for help. We want you to know once and for all that there is no shame or guilt in struggling with anxiety or depression or loneliness or PTSD or even suicidal thoughts. Those struggles will only get worse if you try to hide them. So please bring them out into the light, talk to others, and get help. We're here for you. We care about you. So without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to try this whole Zoom panel discussion thing out, and we're just going to jump right into it. So let me start. Marlene, I'd love to start with you. And here's the question. I'm curious, and I'm going to ask this for all three of you, as you guys are kind of in the field right now, practicing, helping people to deal with mental health. What are you seeing as results from this pandemic? Are you beginning to see things change, more people in need, or the needs change, or what are some of the things you're seeing on the front lines, Marlene?
Well, there's a lot of variation. This is an unprecedented crisis that we're all going through. And so people's life experience prior to the pandemic kind of affects a lot of their reaction. So there's a number of people who, for them, this is like almost a vacation. So they're not experiencing much stress. They're experiencing an opportunity to spend time maybe as a couple or catching up on Netflix. There are a lot of other people, though, have different stressors that they're going through. One of the big things that I'm seeing, and perhaps some of the rest of the counselors are also seeing, is that the families who've had to basically homeschool their children without the resources that they typically have been experiencing kind of almost a 24/7 stress. Again, the resources are not available to them. They're having to juggle a lot of things on top of balancing being teachers for their children. I have other people that are in fear of loss of jobs. So there's a lot of different things. So there's a balance between the stress that they go through, their prior resources that they have, and the fact that this is an extended stressor. We don't have a time frame on this. Most people are operating somewhat in their adrenaline system, doing whatever they can do, keep going, pushing, trying to balance everything for an unknown time period. So that affects a lot of people's experience.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. Christine, what are you seeing?
I agree with Marlene that there's this big variation. And one of the things I've really noticed is I work a lot with clients with trauma. And so trauma already undermines that person's ability to respond in the here and now, because we have old things that are bubbling up a lot. And so even though this crisis isn't necessarily maybe affecting specifically maybe their childhood sexual abuse, it's certainly affecting the stabilization of their everyday environment. And so that's affecting people very differently. And a lot of my couples have been in high conflict during this time because because the stressors, I've been saying a lot that it's like, if you normally carry around like a pebble as a stressor, a global pandemic makes it feel like a stone, so that things just feel heavier and more challenging, while other people are like Marlene said, enjoying the vacation. So anxiety, I have a lot of, what I did was I kind of cleared my schedule a little bit. And so lots of my former clients with high anxiety were coming back and needing to process the fear and, because the pandemic is this whole kind of unknown, we can't see the virus. And when you have daily news cycles that are death counts, our body just absorbs that. And so a lot of that extra trauma kind of landing in people's bodies and feeling feeling disoriented a lot. And of course, extra stress, of course, on top of that.
Yeah. Eric, how about you?
Well, I'd love to even just build on what Christine just said about those external stressors, changing, in the sense that there are a lot of clients I have coming in who are not bringing anything necessarily that different than what they normally would, but they always start with, isn't this crazy what we're going through? and there's even an opportunity to share in a little bit of that, and even talk about, if we're going to talk about our spiritual lives, the idea of, I can remember as things were getting started here, praying with my 12-year-old and just saying, God, today was weird, right? And so being able to recognize that there was a lot of weirdness for a lot of people at the beginning of things. But then the other part that I'd really want to notice about what's happened, especially as we've kind of gone into the number of weeks as this has progressed, is two things. One is that we're actually approaching a second inflection point, and it is creating some more stress and anxiety in some of my clients, because they've kind of gotten used to the whole sheltering idea. But now, if they have kids, school's about to be out. If they have work, it's about to be time to go back to work, but not in the way that they did before. Yeah. And so there's another inflection point that's happening here that's creating additional anxiety within some of my clients. The other part that I would just also piggyback on a little bit of what both Marlene and Christine said is just this undercurrent of fear. And without trying to notice it in any other kind of way than just how it's affecting all of us, whether it's the masks we wear, which in a lot of cases are very, very helpful, or whether it's other precautions that we take. I think one of the things that I read in the last few weeks, I guess it was maybe about 3 weeks ago, Matt Morton posted a Facebook post about what it was like to go into the grocery store.
Yeah.
And the idea of how we actually see that undercurrent of fear that shows up out in society, where we kind of avert our eyes and try to keep our distance, instead of being able to look each other in the eyes, to smile, which you can see a smile even if you have a mask on.
Yeah.
And just being able to recognize what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the things I'm seeing.
Yeah. That's really helpful. What I'm hearing from all three of you is one of the things that I've been thinking some about for our church and our community is the fact that you're taking a situation that's incredibly stressful, that has no known endpoint and probably has multiple transitions and unknowns coming. And one of the things that I'm very have a heart for is that people would know that if they've never struggled with anxiety or despair or something like that before, it should not surprise them if they're struggling now, or if they're going to struggle at some point in the next few weeks or next few months. This is a really tough time. It was remarkable to sit down with my kids who are 10 when a lot of this broke out, and they're like, Dad, nothing like this has ever happened before. We don't know what to do with this. I'm like, well, son, nothing like this has ever happened in my lifetime. I'm much older than you. I don't know what to do with it. Nothing like this happened in my dad's lifetime. He doesn't know. Like, this is really a challenging time, and it's okay to feel those that stress and that struggle. It's not a surprise. So the next question that I have for you guys is probably the one that people are going to be most interested in on this call, and that is getting into advice that you have for maintaining a healthy mindset and kind of watching over our mental health during this pandemic, with the fact in mind all three of you brought up that we don't know how long it's going to last, so we can't live in I'm just going to run on adrenaline and that'll get me through it. It's like, no, we need to be proactively doing some things to watch over our mental health and our mindset, because we don't know how long this is going to last. And there may be more of these inflection points, as you were saying, Eric. And so what I'd love for you to do, we're going to start by talking a little bit about some coping strategies. And my thought to start this is particularly coping strategies for somebody who is struggling all of a sudden with fear, anxiety, or despair. And let's start with the group of people who don't have any coping strategies yet, because they've never dealt with a mental health issue yet. They haven't sat down with one of you or something like that, so they don't necessarily have a workbook or something that they've worked through before. They're really new to this. So for somebody who's really new to thinking about how you watch over your mental health, can you give us some good coping strategies? What would you encourage someone to do and we'll just kind of take those two categories, the person who's dealing with fear, feeling a lot of anxiety, or the person who's feeling despair and just feels like this is never going to end. What are some things that you would encourage them just practically? And let's start, we'll go in reverse order. So Eric, why don't you kick us off?
All right. Well, even in this, again, it's I think, and hopefully it's not looking too different for me as I work with my clients now versus whenever they're bringing whatever they're coming in with. Typically when someone's coming into the counseling office, they are dealing with something that they feel like they need help with, that they're having a hard time working through on their own. And so from that standpoint, in terms of coping, a huge part of what that looks like in the model that I use in my counseling office, it really comes down to a set of 4 steps. And I want to be really clear when I say 4 steps. It sounds like it would be a formula. The counseling process is not formulaic. I believe it's about relationship and change happening in the context of the trust and the care that they're able to receive. But there is a process for when they go out and how to deal with what's happening in life, the additional stressors, the fear that they might feel, the sense of anxiety or even maybe sadness or depression that they may have over changing circumstances. And the way that I look at this is that there are those feelings that come on. I would actually classify anxiety as more of, honestly, a coping behavior versus a feeling that has a deeper root to it. Through some of the psychological research that I've spent some time with, the idea of emotional safety or trust is really critical in evaluating where I am in relationship to everybody else I'm living life with, and being able to recognize that I might be feeling unsafe, that I might be feeling isolated, that I want to be able to recognize and speak out loud what that fear is or what that feeling is. And then be able to go into speaking out loud again what I normally do out of that feeling. Am I going to just withdraw from everybody? Am I going to maybe look for somebody to blame and go into some of those, what I would call negative or anxiety type behaviors that move in a way that doesn't end up in me ending up in a place of peace? And there is a way to move through that, I believe. I do actually, as I counsel from a Christian perspective, there is a an idea of that pain that we might feel and the way that we cope with that pain, that is essentially pretty much equivalent to what it looks like to walk in the flesh. And not that I'm intentionally sinning or intentionally consciously looking to go hurt somebody, but that from a standpoint of how I allow myself to get compromised, honestly, emotionally compromised, there is a process where I can move through that into recognizing, well, what's the truth? Am I really isolated, or am I honestly, at least in God's economy, never alone? Am I potentially, even in my family or in the other people whom I love and I have an ability to connect to, whether virtually or in person, am I really connected? Do I really belong to a group that can care for one another and love one another? And if I have that truth that I can spend more time grounding myself in, then I can do something different. I don't need to withdraw. I can stay present. I can stay involved. I can stay connected. And so being able to walk through a process of recognizing what I'm feeling, saying what I normally do out of that feeling, then crossing over into recognizing what the truth actually is and how I can do things differently, both in God's economy and in my actual present circumstances.
That's great. Thank you, Eric. Reverse order. So Christine, you're next.
Yeah. And I would, again, kind of keep piggybacking, but I would add to that, one of the things when it comes specifically to that anxiety feeling, one of the first things I do in a real practical sense is I want people to notice what's happening, okay? Because our bodies are actually our first indicator. I always tell people, your body's the major prophet. It's going to tell you, I always say, where did you feel it? Stomach, chest, neck, because what we know from neurobiology, from neuroscience now, is that inside the brain, that little alarm bell somehow went off. Now, it doesn't always go off with logical things. It just, it sees, oh, look, danger, danger. And right now, like Marlene said, that system for everybody, that adrenal amygdala, it's a little scanner. It is just, we're all in that kind of back part of our brain. So I want my people to get present first, which I say, I'm going to bring your brain to, this is the relational part up here, where we can now make some new sense of things, or we can do some of those things that Eric's talking about. And so when I say get present, I say stop right there and let's just breathe. Mm-hmm. And I do it, to do it over video has been crazy odd, but I can tell when someone starts and I say, let's just stop, let's just breathe together, because breathing is a little bit of a hack. And it can instantly get that breath. And so what it does, it brings the brain to a little more where the brain goes, oh, okay, maybe I'm not in a panic place. Mm-hmm. And then with that, I'm really telling people, just notice your feelings right now. Let's not judge them. Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes Christians, I've noticed, we're kind of judgmental of ourselves. Like, I shouldn't be afraid. I know God is with me. I shouldn't. And so that judgment starts, and then it tends to then add kind of what you talked about, like that shame. Mm-hmm. So beginning to say, let's work on it. But first, let's just calm and breathe and get the body back online, where you can tell yourself right now, I really am okay right now in this moment. And we talk about how Jesus is with us in this moment. And so that's one of the things that from a practical standpoint, and I say Google breathing strategies. You can find every one of them online. I'm not going to teach you all of them here, but find out that breath. Now, that's not the only strategy, but to me, it's one I like to really start with, because I notice when my body is hijacked, that's a terrible feeling, and it feels really scary, and it intensifies that fear.
That's awesome. Yeah. We have an app for breathing. That's what Julie found at some point. We use a little app and set it on our chest and lay down, and it helps a lot. Marlene, what would you add to that?
Well, I think I'll piggyback as well. Most of us are in an acute stress response that we don't even realize, especially if you hadn't had prior mental health issues. And so sometimes the people that notice are the people around you.
Yeah.
And the main thing there is that we have a heightened continuous response, as Christine is saying. And sometimes we're not even aware of what's going on in our body. We may feel it physically. We may have headaches. We may have stomach aches. We may find that our sleep is disturbed. Mm-hmm. But we don't code that. We just think, okay, this is just part of it. And we don't realize that our bodies are beginning to have a continuous stress response. It doesn't shut off. Mm-hmm. And so part of that is then sometimes we have to stop, as Christine says, and take inventory. What's going on in my body? What am I thinking? What has changed in my behavior? How am I relating to others? And again, sometimes our best mirror are going to be the people around us, our family. Mm-hmm. So part of that is that it is okay, as Christine is saying, that we are experiencing. This is not a moral failure. It's part of a response to an abnormal situation, mm-hmm. and that there's no judgment in it. And so part of it is that we all have different kinds of responses. We have different sensitivities. Someone may react to something in a certain way and it not bother them. Other people, it dwells with them. It just continues on. It seems to have much greater impact. And so part of that is to allow ourselves to have been fearfully and wonderfully made, but in different sensitivities. Mm-hmm. So some of us have a little more proneness to anxiety. Maybe some of it's familial. Maybe we genuinely got it from our family. Some of us have life experiences. We've had some research to suggest that if there were some challenging childhood experiences, what we call adverse childhood experiences, they impact our nervous system. They impact the tendency of our body to react to stress. Sometimes we don't connect that to what we're currently experiencing. And so inventory is so important. The other is to be able to live with and work with the tension between what we know spiritually and what we're experiencing. Most people would say, I can believe that. I know that's true, but my body doesn't seem to know it. Mm-hmm. And so then there's a tension. Why am I feeling this when I know the truth? And so then part of it is to partner with, as Eric is saying, is to partner with the person to, in a sense, help to come alongside their psyche and their body. So that's another part of it is, again, no judgment, as Christine's saying, instead self-compassion. Mm-hmm. That's a very important thing. Scripture tells us that we're to love our neighbors as ourselves, kind of a balance in which we are equal, and to treat ourselves as we would a neighbor or a friend or a best friend or a family member. So that's an important part. There are a lot of practical things that we can do. I'm sure we're going to get to those. They include, as Christine says, dealing with the physiological arousal, so deep breathing. There's different types of relaxation or physiological calming approaches, and we'll probably cover some of those, including deep muscle relaxation, sometimes just getting outside, being in nature, going for a walk, just trying different things. So in a way, everyone's going to come up with their own approach that might work for them. So taking a deep breath, doing square breathing, which is breathing in for a count, breathing out for a count, holding for a count, and then breathing in again. Mm-hmm. So there's different approaches, and it's not one size fits all. Everybody can explore the different options, and then again, create their own. There's some foundational things that are important. One is sleep. Yeah. Because if your sleep is out, it affects a lot of things. It affects depression. It can affect anxiety as well. Exercise, I'm sure we're going to cover that. How you eat, because again, a lot of us are comfort eating or comfort drinking as a way of coping. So it happens. There's no judgment there, but part of it is just being able to.
That's all they are. They don't count.
Right. It's to recognize that we can migrate things so that we can take one thing we're working on, see if we can migrate it to something that's a little healthier. It's a little better way to do it than just punishing ourselves for it, or trying to cold turkey it.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. So, first of all, thank you, all three of you, for giving us some really good ideas to be thinking about and putting into our lives. I like there at the end, Marlene, you were turning to some real practical things to be thinking about for everybody, not just those who are actively in the middle of a battle with an anxiety disorder or depression, but be thinking about sleep. I know in my own mental health struggle and Julie's mental health struggle, sleep is huge. It ends up affecting everything else. Diet is a big deal. Exercise is a big deal. But I'm curious. So Christine, you talked about breathing. I'm wondering, Eric, if I throw it back to you, are there some just general things that you'd throw out there that you'd say, if anybody called you up on the phone and said, hey, Eric, during a time like this, maybe it's good for all of life, but especially at a time like this, can you give me a few things that I ought to include on a regular basis in my life that help me to be in a healthier place mentally?
Yeah. And I think, it's even something where if you're in an enclosed space like an office or something like that, the thing I was thinking about, even as Christine and Marlene were talking about these other techniques of breathing and then other good habits of sleep and eating, we've already talked about the idea of going out and just taking that walk, right? But there is a neurobiological reason for why that can be so effective, and why I actually in my office will sometimes tell my clients, hey, just stand up for a minute, right? And I actually have a little hacky sack in my office as well. And so what happens is I just say, just start rocking back and forth from your right foot to your left foot, right, left. And then while they're doing that, it's kind of like a walk and chew gum at the same time thing, right? But I put the hacky sack in their hands. And I say, just start just very easily and lightly, just throwing that sack from one hand to the other, right? You can look down if you want to, just focus on the sack and just move it from one hand to the next. Because what that's doing is it's doing with what we call bilateral stimulation of the brain. And through engaging both sides of the brain, we're allowing ourselves to self-regulate, to move ourselves out of that emotional midbrain that just goes into those automatic places of the fear, of the anxiety, and it allows us to think. It allows us to think clearly. It allows us to hear questions that are being asked if we're with somebody. It allows for us. Really, once we open our mouths, that has its own impact, because when we're not talking, and again, this is where real relationship, where I'm not just trying to get rid of somebody or take care of a problem or whatever it is, where I'm actually engaged in real relationship with someone. When I open my mouth, there are multiple things that are happening. Parts of my brain have to create that speech. Parts of my brain have to hear the speech that I'm giving. And what ultimately happens in some of the research that we've done, it shows that when my mouth is closed, my neurons are firing at about 8 to 10 times the rate as when my mouth is open. When I'm speaking, when I'm having to slow down my neural patterns to keep up or to slow down with my speech. Mm-hmm. And so there are ways to engage in that authentic conversation. There are ways mechanically, through rocking back and forth, through throwing something from one hand to the other, even honestly through singing. Singing actually can regulate our brains as well. So there are lots of different things we've learned about how to help ourselves in those moments of distress.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yeah.
I was going to throw it to Christine because this is funny, but I think my wife got it from you from the retreat that you did for ladies. But when you did that retreat, she went out to the lake during break period or whatever to do yoga, and part of it was just to get her body engaged in what her mind was doing. And then recently in the last few weeks, because of the season that it is, I'm not sure which of you she got it from, but she's like, we need rose petals. So she'll bring in rose petals, and the kids and I, all four of us, will just sit there and rub rose petals between our fingers because of the sensation of it. For me, that rose petals isn't quite the thrill.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, I found I had sorted away a mechanical pocket watch that was my great grandfather's. And every day, every morning, and every night, I wind it, and then I have to set it, and I take it apart and we'll adjust it. And it's I was an engineer, so it's kind of appealing to me. But for a few minutes, I have to take out this fine little screwdriver and work on it, and I have to wind dials and gears, and it's very therapeutic to me. And so now I know the phrase bilateral stimulation. Is that why it's therapeutic? But for me, that's a very good moment, is to just stop and focus on the sensations of mechanical device. So anyways, I love that. Christine, what would you add?
Yeah, and I was going to go right on. We keep piggybacking, but I tell my clients all the time, what happens when you hold a beach ball underwater? The beach ball wants to pop up. I mean, you can only hold this stuff down. So this emotion and anxiety, or however we want to call this, it's energy and it's in there. And so we want to I always say, Jesus says, walk in the light. Walk in the light. That means let's just talk about what's happening. So we want to let that beach ball out in the sense that you can make room and space for what's happening in here. And practically, you're exactly right. I do. They're called grounding techniques, but I always go, okay, 5 senses. We have sound, we have hearing, we have smell, we have taste, we have sight, we have touch. So any of those. So the touching the pedals. I have that crazy kinetic sand in my office. Someone's getting really. I just said, okay, here's this because the brain is like, what is this? Is it liquid or is it solid? It's moving in their fingers. But that sensation is very calming. And you think about how children do naturally kind of learn, and then we kind of outgrow the belief that we need to take care of ourselves gently and softly. And so so again, Marlene, you said it earlier, that whatever works for you, find it, that it's going to be very different. But again, this bilateral stimulation, I teach clients a butterfly tap. When you're trying to feel maybe a happier feeling, you bring it in, tap it a little bit, that what it's doing, there's a lot of different methods to that, but it's your body is, because you're integrating, you're not integrated when you're in a high emotional and reactive place. And so any of those and the grounding will bring, and sometimes if someone's really stressed out in session, I'll say, okay, look around my office and find 10 things that are blue. Okay. And then they just count 10 things, and I'll say, all right, just what are you noticing? And then sure enough, it's like, I feel a little calmer, because just by looking around, because the brain's telling that person, focus on the danger, focus on the danger, focus on the danger, focus on and so that it's the brain's trying to keep us safe. I would say the brain's sometimes not as smart as we think it is, because it's doing this, but it's giving the wrong messages. So you need to kind of get it back. And so I'd go back to agreeing that those bilateral, but also those grounding techniques, it's just any of those. So music, something you see, something you smell, use essential oils. Mm-hmm. I say get the most lemon water you can get and drink it. It's going to jolt you back. And those are real practical. They don't seem very mental healthy, right? But they do help.
That's excellent.
Yeah. So those are good body responses that allow you to get back in your body and be in touch with what's going on, and in a sense, go into the here and now on it. Mm-hmm. You mentioned one that I think is real important, which is what the business that we're all involved in, which is to be a sounding board, to be a place where someone can talk about their feelings, whatever they feel. That's an important part. And some of us will have that in our family situation. Some of us don't. Some of us have it in friendships. But it's real important to feel like I can unload whatever I'm feeling, and that there's no judgment on it. I don't have to watch the response that it has on somebody else. And so there's a lot of relief in being able to feel what you feel with somebody else, and have them hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So
that actually segues to the next question that I'd like to ask you. So I think a lot of folks are experiencing things that they're struggling with, but they may be hesitant to reach out for help. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Maybe a desire to appear stronger than we are. I think there's a lot of people who I'm talking to who they're not as bad off as people we read about in the news. They're not dying of COVID-19. They haven't lost their job yet. And so I think there's almost this feeling, especially among Christians, that, well, if I'm not dying of COVID-19 or lost my job and I'm homeless, then I don't get to say I'm struggling. Like I have to say, no, I'm great. I'm excited. I'm happy. I'm content. And obviously we should look for the good things and we should seek that joy that can be found in the Lord. But my concern is, how can people know, hey, it's time for me to admit that even though I'm not on a respirator or lost my job, I do need help. I need to reach out to, whether that's somebody at the church who can help me, or a counselor who can help me, a doctor who can help me. If somebody was to call you three up, or you're talking to somebody at church in the foyer and they're just wondering, how do I know when it's time for me to pick up the phone? How do I know when it's time for my loved one who seems like they're struggling? When is it time for me to tell them you should call somebody? What are the signs that you look for to say, hey, it's time for, first of all of us can talk to counselors all the time. There should be no shame or hesitation. And so the answer is 100% of the time. But what are the particular things that you would say that's a good indicator that it's probably time for you to pick up the phone, or for your loved one to pick up the phone and ask for help? Eric, let's go back and start with you. Are there some certain things that you say, these are kind of the things that I say, this is when it's time to pick up the phone?
See, I don't know that I do. I mean, I want to be careful in answering that, because I think there are people who are coming in at all different stages of the difference between kind of the subjective sense of how they see what they're dealing with versus how we might look at it if we just lined everybody up in a row and then just kind of measured that objectively. It's just not gonna come out in a way where it might be that one of the, again, if I line people up like that one of the people who maybe objectively has some of the most difficult and stressful circumstances maybe has the tools and the equipping and the reservoir of energy and time and strength to be able to move into that in a regulated way and a healthy way, and deal with that. And maybe, and even more than that, just to go back to, again, what I think Marlene just has said the last few times she's spoken of that idea of the relationship of the sense that we have that someone is safe for us. If we have those relationships in our lives, we may not need to go see a counselor. I mean, I'll be honest, there's a part of it where I tell so many of my clients, I say, a huge part of my hope is that whatever gets modeled in here is something that of how we relate to one another, of how you experience trustworthiness and care from me, that it can be something that you facilitate and cultivate with other people in your lives, so that you don't need to be here anymore. You don't need to keep coming back in to my office. You can build that community of love and safety and care that is going to allow for even maybe some of the most significant external stressors to be bearable, because I have the people I need with me and the kind of relationships I need around me.
That's a great explanation of that. Yeah. Christine, how do you think about that question? Like, when is it time for somebody to seek professional help? How do you help somebody walk through that?
Yeah, well, I like to talk anytime I have the chance about what I call, I wish we all had the view of maintenance more when it comes to our personhood, our bodies, our souls. Because I always say, if our car is making a funny sound, we take it to the mechanic. if our air conditioning quits working, but if our souls start finding noises, we don't think about maintenance. So I like to say it's okay to invest in taking care of yourself, as a maintenance for therapy for that. Well, then also when we talk about when is it time, maybe when you're past, when the car maybe is no longer making clunking sounds, it's not starting, you're feeling a little more shut down. A couple things I watch for are when someone's sleep has been really disrupted. Right now, that's a little odd. All of us feel a little off, but sleep disruption is sometimes a real indication that the body systems are out of sync and they're dysregulated. And it's really hard to, and Marlene talked about that earlier, it's very hard to get everything back online when that's so disrupted. And so I look for sleep disruptions, for eating disruptions, for I would like to say sometimes the things that you used to do, you just can't do anymore. Sometimes that's a sign that there's an inability. Maybe I'll have a parent that says, I can't, even with my children, I can't even discipline. I'm so out of sorts, because we want parents to be taking care of if they are depressed, we don't want them parenting, in that deep, dark depression. It makes it difficult to manage some of those things. So to get some help in that. And when it just seems like those everyday tasks are no longer possible. And especially when I'm looking over on the anxiety side, when you get into having like panic attacks regularly, those are so terrifying and really scary because those symptoms are landing in such a terrifying way. Those are, to me, another sign that takes a little extra care than maybe because I do believe in building the body of Christ to help each other. But sometimes in some of those more severe places, when someone feels like they can't even go out because of the panic, that's a good sign. It might be helpful to reach out. There's just a couple that I have there.
Great. That's great. Marlene, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would, again, just piggyback. A lot of the maintenance is somewhat preventative. You want to catch things early when things feel like one is that they continue on. They don't go back down. It's like Christine was saying, is that anxiety is constant, or you've lost interest in things, or you're pulling back from the things that you used to do that were positive. Sometimes that's the time to come in, not when it feels like I've let it go for a long period of time. So the maintenance can kind of help us re-regulate when someone doesn't feel like themselves. And again, sometimes it's not them that recognizes it. Sometimes it's their loved one. Christine mentioned a number of the functional things. If it feels like I can't seem to have enough energy to function, or I'm laboring, or everything is an effort, that's sometimes an indicator. When I'm not bouncing back as quickly from things, when it seems like things just get heavier and heavier and heavier, or my anxiety is just floating on a constant level and I can't seem to bring it down, that can feel scary for people because it feels like I don't have control over my physical or psychological function, when really it's a signal that something needs to be attended to. And so a lot of times it's letting us know we're on overload, instead of that there's something wrong in that sense. And so it's like, okay, it's time to bring the vehicle in. It's time to do the maintenance so that it continues to run well, because a lot of our vehicles are running 24/7 right now. So even if we don't think we're on, we are, because of the stressor in our environment, in our world. We're having to be vigilant about a lot of things that we didn't used to have to be. And we're trying to balance everything. Sometimes we are trying to do too much, or we're trying to keep the standard we used to have instead of scaling back, because that's sometimes important. With all that we're juggling, it's important to think about, is it okay that I do a good enough job and not necessarily a perfect job?
Yeah, that actually, I do want to touch on what you said right at the end, because that was really helpful for both Julie and I. Is when the world went to homeschooling overnight, and suddenly we found ourselves homeschooled teachers, we felt
without recognizing, without ever making a conscious decision, we put a great deal of pressure on ourselves to be perfect homeschool parents. I don't know why. No one told me I had to do that. It's just, maybe it's a performance culture or something, but we got to do this right. And that was crushing, and really, really hard to put that on ourselves, especially not giving ourselves. I think at some point we realized we would give more grace to our actual teachers of our kids in this moment than we're giving to ourselves right now. And that was very helpful. We're down to the last few minutes. Just for those who are watching, one of our goals in this conversation is just to get the conversation started. Our hope for all four of us on the screen, one of our hopes here is to help, for all those watching, help you realize that mental health is something that's part of all of our lives, something for all of us to be cognizant of, aware of, and when we do need to reach out for help, to feel no shame with that and no fear with that. And I love some of the advice that was given there at the end, this idea of being proactive about it, that there are things to look for that, hey, this is a sign I need to get in, like panic attacks, but also thinking more proactively that I don't have to wait for it to get that bad. I can talk to somebody. And then even before that, what Eric was saying, if I look at my life and I realize I don't right now, like I would have to go to a counselor because I don't have anybody to talk to proactively today. That's somebody who's a friend to me and a brother or sister walking with me, then that is something to work on. So my hope is that for all of us, it will recognize that our mental health is something that we need to be proactively investing in by building community and building relationships with both professionals and with our friends, with our church, with our community on an ongoing basis. And to that end, the last question that I have for you guys, at least in this first mental health night that we're doing, is to open the door and give you the opportunity to speak about what resources you would direct people to who want to learn more about this. So I want to be careful to say I'm not asking you for resources that would replace a counselor. Like, hey, if you're dealing with panic attacks, go here and that's all you need. We want to encourage people to reach out to counselors. But along the way, I think all of us need to continue to grow in our understanding of our mental health for our own sake, and so that we can bless others and be a good friend and a good a partner to other people as they watch over their mental health. So I'd like to go around, and Marlene, I'll start with you and just ask what resources, whether they be books, websites, organizations, whatever it might be, come to mind that you would say, this would be great to read more about or to engage more so that you can continue this journey of learning.
Right. Well, we have, I guess there was an edition of a couple of books on included. So one is the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook. Another is the Feeling Good Handbook by David Burns. And I'm sure Christina has a number of apps that she also recommends. There's Headspace, there's Calm, there's another one called Stop, Breathe, and Think. Mindshift, CBT is also on there. CBT is what many of us do. Christina does trauma-informed therapy. But the CBT looks at the thought processes that we have, the behaviors that we have, and changing them to impact both anxiety, depression, sometimes obsessive-compulsive conditions as well. So there's also a CBT for insomnia, and there is a CBT-I coach that's online. So that sometimes for some people can be helpful, just to get an idea of what to do when there are thoughts that continue to rotate in our heads that seem to promote the symptoms that we have of anxiety, worry, depression, or even insomnia.
Awesome. Christine, what resources would you point people to?
Yeah, Marlene was much more prepared for that answer to that question than I was. I'm like, I don't have that many. I do. We talked earlier, we're not trying to promote our own specific brand or anything, but I do on my website, I've been trying to just give stuff away, and every app that you said, Marlene, what a wonderful world of technology that we can access it for these purposes. And that's wonderful. There's one book that I recommend a lot. It's called The Anxiety Cure by Dr. Archibald Hart. And he's got some really great tips on there. And then another one that it's a little more broad than just depression, anxiety, but Pete Scazzaro has some discipleship materials out called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, Emotionally Healthy Relationships. And he does a lot of really good training about emotional work, but also reaching out for support and doing some of your family work. Well, and those are just more maintenance type tools than they are exactly counseling tools. But I do have the rest of some things up on my website, and just ditto whatever they're saying, because I wasn't quite as prepared with my list.
We'll post a link, but remind us of your website, Christine.
Yes, it's christinehoover.org.
Perfect. Okay. Eric?
Yeah, I would totally concur on the Scazzaro recommendation. The stuff he has put out is just phenomenal in having us be able to think more deeply through, and goes right along with that idea of the here and now, and really being able to be present in a way that's healthy for us. Honestly, I also have consolidated a lot of the resources that I've come across into a central place, a resources page on my website, whether it's videos, TED Talks, YouTube videos of different sorts, even also some support resources, whether they are regional here to the Brazos Valley or whether they are maybe national hotlines, a couple of medical doctors and psychiatrists in town who I trust. So that one page has all of those resources on it, and it's on the website cschristiancounseling.com.
Perfect. Well, let me say to all three of you, so grateful to have you here tonight. This was a blessing to me, a blessing to our church and our community. I hope that this becomes a normal thing, that we can have these online panel discussions and continue to learn from folks like you guys who can help us through this kind of thing. Just a reminder to everybody who's watching this, we're here for you. We're praying for you. We have pastors and staff here at the church who are ready to take your call, take your email, whatever it is at any time. There is no shame and no judgment in reaching out for help, because we all need it. And we want to be really clear about that. A lot of us on staff, myself included, as a teaching pastor here, have needed counseling, have needed medication, have needed help to build good mental health. And so we love you guys. We're grateful to have you tonight. Thank you, all three of you. So grateful to have you. So thank you very much. Till next time.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really are so grateful to have all of you here. My name is Ryan Pale.
And I'm Julie White, and we are here on staff at Grace Bible Church.
So there's a bunch of resources that were listed at the end of the conversation, but before we even get into that, I want to just say there are some people who are viewing or listening to this and you are in a dark spot. You may be tempted with thoughts of self-harm, or you may be unsafe. And so if that's you, just stop what you're doing and go call a friend, call 911, or even just drive up to a hospital. We want to make sure that you're safe first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love for us to talk about things that kind of stuck out to both of us during the conversation tonight. For me, I kept hearing over and over the reports of relationships and community. And we highly value community here at Grace Bible Church. And so if that's something that you are lacking and you really want to be around others and have someone to talk to, I would encourage you to go to our website at grace-bible.org. You can click on the link that says join a group, and we would love to get you connected with others.
And you heard during the conversation, you heard a lot of amazing things. There were some really, really good things that were mentioned. One of the things that kept coming up as well is pay attention to your body, pay attention to your mind, just stop and listen to what your body is telling you. For some people that may be really easy, and for some people that may be really hard. So at the end of the conversation, they listed out a ton of resources that tell you both kind of how our minds work, but then also how to take next steps. And so we have a list of resources ready and available for you.
Yeah, so if you'd like to access those resources, again, it is on our webpage, grace-bible.org. Click on spiritual resources. We have all the resources that the counselors listed, other books, some sermon series, and actually some apps that are really great as well.
Yeah, looking forward to reading those. And then finally, if even doing that just seems like a lot, you just really need somebody to help walk you through next steps of your growth, of your health, please reach out to us. Give a call to Grace Bible Church. We're here for you. We'd love to be with you in whatever it is that you're dealing with. So having said all that, we just want to say again, thank you so much for tuning in. We love you, and we hope that you are blessed this evening.